Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here on this edition of the REI Hacker Podcast. My guest today is Nathaniel Hovsepian. Nathaniel is a real estate investor. He is a sub-2 student, and he's a military veteran as well. Thank you for your service. Really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time and being here.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me. As I was saying kind of ahead before we started recording, it's like we're very blessed to be able to do these kinds of things, right?
Oh yeah, it's crazy. I think back to when I never really had like a full-time job, right? I've kind of created my own jobs, but you have the ability to kind of structure those however you want,
Hmm.
right? And so sometimes we feel like we have to pack our days full of just busy work. But it sounds like you've been able to structure it in a way where you can get spend time with your family and also get a lot of work done, which
Yeah.
brings in the revenue that kind of creates this perpetual cycle of being able to, create your own environment.
Yeah. I mean, we work, as you're aware of, as an entrepreneur, we work long days.
Hmm.
I start my day starts at 4:45 in the morning. It's not right up, get up and go right to work, but I do some other things before the kids wake up. And then throughout the day, they're awake from 7 to 7. It's sprinkled work and playtime. And then they go to bed and we get a little bit more work done for a couple hours before we're like, I'm exhausted and go back to bed.
That's awesome to have that
Yeah.
freedom, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you can create whatever you want, right? Like some people have what they call lifestyle businesses, right? Where they make enough money to, have a certain lifestyle, but it isn't always like, okay, we're creating like the next Google or the next PayPal or the next big startup company. But it's really cool too that you and your wife get to work together. What's that like?
Yeah. It has its challenges. We have three hats essentially that we're wearing. We're the entrepreneur, the parent, like mom, dad, and then the wife. And uh, they are unfortunately in that order, kind of. We have the entrepreneur and parent are constantly getting juggled between the two of us. And
Right.
then the husband, wife does get put to the back burner a lot of the times. It's something that we do focus on. We time block certain things in for trying to, it's very difficult to separate those two when you're having the one-on-one husband-wife time. You want to talk about business, you want to talk about the kids, like, hey, what happened this day? What can we do, going forward? But we have to take those hats off and go husband-wife because, you know, 18 years from now, well, yeah, something like that. The kids are going to be gone or at least
Hmm.
be parting ways. We'll have built this business, right? And if we haven't worked on us in the meantime, we'll be just strangers in a house together with a good business, but like that's not what we want. We married each other, we fell in love, and just because we work in a business together, we don't want that to be you know put to the wayside. So long story short, yeah,
Yeah,
it could be, it kind of be challenging, and we're both
sure.
um, we're both hard-headed. We're both kind of controllers in a sense. And so sometimes it's hard to go, this is your thing, this is my thing, aspects of the business, and let the other person, especially for me, do their thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you guys complement each other? Are you like good at one thing and she's good at another, or is how have you separated the workload? Is it based off of what you guys are good at?
Essentially, yeah. If you're familiar with, I want to say it's Rocket Fuel, the name of the book, the visionary integrator aspect,
Hmm.
right? I'm very much the visionary, the person that's out kind of being the face of things, and she's very much the integrator, the person behind the scenes, making sure that all the things are functioning. It's really her and our operations manager who are handling all the day-to-day stuff. She's great at Excel and data and looking at data and things like that. And while I can do that and I could be good at it, just not what gives me energy. I'm more versed at having conversations, being on, podcasts and being able to explain and compel and all those types of things. She could be good at it. It's not what gives her excitement. It's not what she wants to fill her day with. And
Right.
that's essentially why we've made this pivot is because we've been wholesaling and flipping houses for 7 years leading up to 2024. And she doesn't want to be on the phone talking to sellers and talking to buyers. Like, how do we going back to the being able to construct our day how we want, how do we construct our business and our operations to make it so we both are doing things that we give us energy and give us excitement to get up in the day. And for us, wholesaling wasn't it, because it wasn't something that Brittany was passionate about, going on and doing. So we were fortunate enough that we were able to kind of put that aside at the beginning of this year and focus on the buying properties. But we can get into that. I mean,
Yeah, and that actually brings up a good point. So you guys are pivoting away from transactional type businesses like
Mhm.
flips and wholesaling and more into just acquiring rental properties, building a portfolio, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned me joining Sub 2. When I first joined Sub 2, this is going back to 2022. So it's been a little over 2.5 years at this point. I had already been wholesaling. We had already closed a bunch of deals and flipped a bunch of houses. And it was like, how do I get better at this? That was my main thing when I joined Sub 2. How do I get better on the phone? How do I get better at doing deals? Yeah, I wanted to learn creative finance. I ended up learning a whole bunch more in Sub 2. But I talked to a couple people early on and they were like, well, why did you get started in real estate? And we had got started to buy properties. And a couple different people said, well, why the heck are you wholesaling? And it didn't click. I hadn't gone through it enough, I think, at that point for it to really hit home. But start with the end in mind was what
Hmm.
some people said. And it wasn't until I met our current coach, our current business coach, Jesse Stanton, and he said it, where I think that we had just been through enough at that point where it went, start with the end in mind. Okay, the end was to buy properties. How do we go do that? Well, it meant shutting down everything, which is pretty frightening for most
Mm,
people. But, we had been through a lot at that point, and we were confident that we could make the next venture work. And so
right.
that's what we did. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people start off with wholesaling to be able to learn the skills of acquisition, right? Negotiation. But for a lot of people, it's more about creating liquidity, getting cash that you can operate from, and then, because when you're building a portfolio and you're buying properties, you typically have to put money down,
Right.
right? On houses, even if it's a sub two type deal, there's a kind of a price, right, to get into the deal.
Yep.
Even if you're not using traditional sort of financing, right? Like a mortgage, there's still, a certain amount of money that you have to bring to the table to get the seller what they want. So so they can go and do what they want to do. So, um, and a lot of people who are building portfolios still wholesale. Like it's just one tool in
Yeah.
their toolbox, right? Because you're going to come across deals, properties that make sense financially that maybe you don't want in your portfolio, right? And
Right.
maybe somebody else wants it. So I think there's always a place for wholesaling in most business models.
Yeah.
And honestly,
That's
too, if you think about the acquisition side of it, you're still sales, you're still talking to sellers, even if you're going to decide to keep it in your portfolio. So that skill set that you guys have built over time is still valuable, right?
100%. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the coming up properties that you wouldn't want to purchase yourself. That's how I ended up wholesaling in the first place. Is we had bought this rental property and I was like, how do I go buy more? I wanted to go direct to seller, and I ended up finding properties and locking properties up that I wasn't interested myself in keeping. And so that's how we started wholesaling. And I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now and having the conversations with equity partners and other wholesalers and being able to help other wholesalers grow their business if I hadn't gone through those 7 years of wholesaling. So I think it is, for the reasons that you mentioned, a very, very valuable place for people to start, right?
Yeah.
Almost no monetary barrier of entry, right? You can go pay for leads and stuff, but you can just use your sweat equity to go find leads. And it's going to teach you all the different skills from talking to sellers, comping both ARV, after repair value, current value, rental prices, talking to buyers, figuring out what a buyer's actually looking for, estimating repairs. Like you learn so much from wholesaling that
Hmm.
if you have zero experience and zero money, but a lot of time, like 100%, that's where you should start.
Oh, 100%. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
It's too, it also can help you prove that this business is for you
Yeah.
before getting really deep with a lot of large investment and figuring out if you've got what it takes. Because
Yeah.
it's definitely it's a big challenge. And people who have money, disposable money, like they can just kind of like pay for problems to go away.
Hmm.
And but we all know in business that sometimes you don't have the revenue where you can always just pay for problems to go away. You have to kind of hack those situations and make things work. And
Yeah.
what better way to figure that out is in a wholesale business?
Yeah. You're going to learn so many problems and things like that. And then, like you said, you're going to learn about things about yourself. How long am I willing to work without a payday, so to speak, right? Because the
Yeah.
average wholesaler, 3 to 6 months is when your first deal's coming in.
If they get that far, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because, more than 9 out of 10 people are going to give up before that first deal comes in,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate. But tell me, what did you learn about yourself during that process? Did you figure out that you were good at certain things, that you weren't cut out for other things? Did you ever think about quitting and doing something else?
Oh, I wouldn't say that I thought about quitting and doing something else necessarily, just outside of real estate, but definitely quitting and not doing wholesaling anymore. Every time as especially starting out, you get a contract, it's like a high, right? And then something happens to that contract for whatever reason, you're not able to sell it. Maybe you go walk the property and it needs a lot more repairs than you thought it did. I hope you can't hear the kid crying in the background too much right now. No,
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 we're
no.
good.
Okay. They just walked in from outside and they're hysterical right now. But yeah, so it like for whatever reason, this deal isn't as good as we thought it was, and it would kind of like bring you down. I learned that about myself that I was not managing those ups and downs very well from an emotional standpoint. And so I would like, oh, something happened. Oh, I should just quit. This isn't for me. Like and then probably because of Brittany, like, no, 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 this is what we're doing. Like, you got to go figure this out. Like, okay, on to the next one. Let's keep going. So I learned how to manage those a little bit better. A big help for me was the book, The Gap and the Gain, and
Mhm.
looking at the things that you've learned and the things that you've accomplished rather than the things that you haven't quite yet. I learned that I was a little bit more outro or extroverted than I thought I was. I thought I was like pure introvert, not talking to people. I still am introverted. I just show as an out extrovert. I like display as an extrovert, kind of thing. But I love talking to sellers and figuring out what was really underlying going on because when you're talking on the phone to a seller, most of the time what you're hearing right off the bat, these are like very superficial surface level problems. It's not until you're able to ask better questions and listen better where you're able to actually figure out what's really going on at the surface. So that's an aspect that I actually do miss about wholesaling is I don't talk to sellers very much anymore.
Mm.
And it was some of the most intriguing little conversations because you're listening, you're empathizing, but you're also like, what's the next question that I can ask that's going to peel that onion back a little bit more? So it's a little bit of a conversational puzzle, which was interesting to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So help me understand why you don't have to talk to sellers anymore. You're still buying properties, right? And you still want to get good deals. Really, in my mind, the only thing that's different from like a wholesale strategy compared to, a buy and hold strategy is what you do with the contract once you get it.
Hmm.
Wholesaler, you turn it into sales mode and you go out here and try to sell the contract. But if you're going to turn it into into a rental property, you're just now you're figuring out how to fund the deal, right?
Yeah.
So why did you change the strategy of talking to sellers if you're still looking to buy properties?
We wanted to take the path of least resistance to buying as many properties as we could, as quickly as we could. And so I needed to remove myself from the acquisitions equation,
Mm,
from the direct to seller, direct to agent acquisitions equation. So instead of me having to go one on one, now I go to 1,000 wholesalers who are out there doing that for us essentially,
mm,
right? They're not part of our business. They all have their own businesses, but we're a preferred go-to buyer for all these people. So when they bring in good deals, we don't mind paying them the acquisition or the assignment fee, right, on the properties, because now we're able to go hit a lot of different options rather than me being on the phone or having an acquisitions team being on the phone, just hammering the phones all day talking to sellers. So um, it does cost us a little bit more, right? We're having to pay assignment fees to people, but because we're able to connect with a lot more wholesalers, we are able to do a little bit more deals that way.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you just kind of restructured the process so you could do more deals. How many properties do you typically add to your portfolio in a given month? Is it pretty consistent? Are you ramping it up?
We are slowly ramping up right now. We're trying our first goal right now that we're hitting is, or we're looking to get to, is one per week. Eventually, we want to get to two and a half per week, that we're purchasing both creatively, and we're now opening up cash in a few select markets that we really, really like. But we're at like one and a half right now a month. So we have a doubling to do in order to get to that, and that's why we're opening up a couple cash markets that um, so we can see a little bit more deals and open and buy a few more properties.
So you brought up the wholesaling aspect of it, and a lot of people don't think about wholesaling sub two or creative deals. They think about cash deals mostly. So how is that process different? Is it the same essentially, and it's just how you're financing the property that's different?
It definitely the way you're financing the property is different. The buying or getting assigned a seller finance or a subject to property is very similar to a cash. There's more paperwork that is involved. There's a little bit more due diligence on the buyer's side, right? A cash deal's pretty straightforward. I'm buying the thing for $100,000. This is where I'm getting the cash from. With a subject to or a seller finance, it's like, okay, I really am looking at the purchase and sales agreement to make sure that all the T's and I's are dotted, wait, crossed and dotted. Because I, you know, in a cash transaction, yes, I'm taking over a purchase agreement from somebody, but in a creative, I'm not only taking over the purchase agreement, I'm taking over a note, be it a mortgage that's already in place or a mortgage that's being created, right? There are certain stipulations and things that I need to be aware of. If it's a seller finance, is there a balloon involved where I need to balloon this person out? Like all those things are details. So it's just a little bit more detail oriented than a cash transaction is, but
Yeah.
essentially the process is very similar. Yeah.
And then in your due diligence process, what would make you say no to a property? Like somebody brings you a deal, you look at it, like what are the things that maybe people aren't thinking about that they should pay attention to when evaluating a creative assignment?
Yeah. For so I'm speaking just strictly for us at this point, but for us, it needs to break even as just bare minimum. It needs to break even as a long-term rental, which means that if the mortgage payment, PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance is $1,000, I need to be able to bring in at least 1150 for me to be able to pay a property manager and then be able to pay off the underlying note. That's just bare minimum for us. Um, yeah, for things to be aware of from a wholesaler standpoint, we're seeing a lot of subject to houses right now that are just being locked up, and there's no real play for them as far as a hold strategy unless you're buying strictly for depreciation and you don't care about losing money on a month-to-month basis. A lot of these properties we're seeing, it's the environment has changed now. And so people that have bought within the last year or so, there's 6%, 7% interest rates. And those things just are not going to cash flow
No.
typically as many hold strategies. You could buy a 7% interest rate in a Orlando, Florida, for example, and be able to make it a short-term rental, but markets are super saturated with short-term rentals right now, and you don't want to have a property that only has one strategy. And then if that strategy doesn't work out, now you're stuck paying, $500 a month just to hold a property. Um, I do see, I mentioned the balloon. People will lock up a deal and like, hey, balloon in 1 year or 2 years. Like, well, I need a way to be able to balloon this person out, and that's going to be refinancing. And if you only give me a year or two for the property to appreciate, unless I've already got a bunch of equity built into the property, that's not enough time for the property to have appreciated and me balloon this person out. So, I going out there and making promises to sellers that, oh yeah, we'll balloon you out in 2 years. You need to kind of set the stage a little bit better for we're going to have a balloon clause in place, which says that if there's not at least 25% equity is what we do at time of balloon, the balloon will extend for a year to however whatever the period is until equity is reached. Typically, when we
Hmm.
do a balloon clause, we'll also add a a small percentage to the monthly payment. This accomplishes a couple things as it like incentivizes the seller a little bit to agree to the balloon because hey, you're going to get more monthly. And for us, it accelerates the amount of principal pay down we're going to have, so helping that 25% equity get reached.
Got it.
Those are a couple things. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I guess
Yeah, I can see that the complexity there is much higher. Like this isn't wouldn't be something that a newbie would want to even attempt until they've done a lot of transactions and really get the fundamentals down. But I like the aspect of, worst case scenario, you're breaking even on a long-term basis. But okay, that's worst case. What's a best case scenario look like? Is it, something that cash flows, pretty significantly at a short term or a midterm rental or even like a co-living
yep.
scenario? Is that something you guys look at too?
The co-living is probably the primary thing that we're seeing pencil out right now. Because we're nationwide, we're open to a lot of, you know, mid-sized cities, and co-living is very popular right now. There's a lot of people that need affordable housing. They want a place to stay that has the amenities of a house, but they can't afford, a house on their own, or they just don't need a house. And so they want to have an affordable place to stay, right? And be able to just get up and go to work and come home and eat their dinner and watch their Netflix.
Right.
Yeah. So co-living is a very popular choice for us right now when properties are underwriting. Typically, we're bringing in an equity partner into deals, and so they're going to fund the entry fee, being cash to seller, cash to wholesaler, agent fees, closing costs, rehabbing the property, furnishing the property, marketing it, and holding it in that meantime. And on average, it's like 65, $70,000 for a property that we're purchasing. And
Mm.
these partners want to get a return on their money. So usually we're looking for at least 20% cash on cash return from a entry fee standpoint as far as the deals we're looking at goes. That covers making sure that the equity partner is going to get a good cash flow as well as we're going to get cash flow on top of that.
So that equity partner, they're there for the long term, right? They're going to take this with you to the end. They're going to take part in the appreciation, the cash flow, and they're going to get a return on their investment right out of the gates, which that can be exciting. 20% is a great return. I mean,
Mhm.
there isn't another vehicle out there that's going to give you that
Yeah,
kind of return.
right.
Um, do you have trouble convincing equity partners that it's that high of a return, or do they think it's too good to be true?
No, I mean, we go through the whole due diligence process with anybody that's interested in buying a house with us. So, they're not seeing 20% in its entirety. They're going to get a split of that, but it's still 98% of the time, it's better than you can go get by just sticking your money in a 401k or a stock market or whatever.
Right.
Plus, because they're owning the asset, they get the benefits, like you mentioned, of the appreciation of it over time. They get the benefits of the depreciation once they're able to accept that vehicle. And so when you look at it from a cash on cash plus these other benefits standpoint, a lot of the times the returns are, 30, 50% because you're getting the long-term plays as well.
Mm.
You know,
So it isn't 20% then, right? You say you brought up 20%.
the
What is the
20%,
real return that they get as
yes.
as an equity partner?
It depends on the deal, of course. 20% is what we're shooting for total cash on cash return. And then depending on what the partner's looking to accomplish, it's sometimes as just a 50-50 split. It can be skewed depending on, do they want more cash flow right now and maybe less equity? And you can play with them. That's the fun part about um, creating partnerships is you can be creative in that as well. So we're doing
Mm.
creative financing, we're doing creative holding, and then we're doing creative partnering. And like for example, we just did one a couple weeks ago where it was like a 70, I think it's a 70-30 for the first 2 years, 60-40 for the second 2 years, and then it goes to 50-50 after year five. And so you play with it on a scale to go, hey, this is what the equity partner wants as far as returns go. We're not going to see that. We're not going to realize that right off the bat. So we have to play with those numbers.
Got it.
Yeah.
Which markets do you like for this co-living model?
Oh, there's so many. We really like a few of the bigger cities in Texas. Um, Oklahoma City is a great one. We have a couple that we're looking at in Birmingham or Montgomery. Montgomery, Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama. Yeah.
Hmm.
So like think if it's a, 150, 200,000 population city and up, like it's a pretty good market for co-living. There's people there, there's, entry level workers that they just need a room to rent. And they'll come
Hmm.
and as long as you give them, you know, decently furnished house, a nice updated house, you lay out the rules of the house. Like we break things down pretty simply so everybody gets a specific amount of cabinet space. Everybody has certain chores that they do to can maintain the house and keep the house up. And as long as you can kind of keep that environment going, people are happy to come stay there because you're providing a service to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you using your own management or like a management company, or are you doing pad split or a combination?
We're not doing any of the tenant property management ourselves. Part of our getting it to that process is going and vetting property managers that have experience either just doing straight co-living or like you mentioned with pad split. Depending on the city and the situation, we will use pad split or not. We prefer not. Um, just from a cash flow standpoint, we make more money if pad split doesn't take money from us. That being said, pad split is good at what they do. And so when, you get a property that pad split is primarily a primary market and it's like, okay, let's let the people that are good at what they do what they do. That's why we create partnerships, right? That's why we bring in contractors who are good. That's why we bring property managers in who are good, is because we just want to let empower the people that do what they do best to do what they do best.
Yeah. So which markets are good for it from like a legal perspective? I know like here in Colorado, the governor recently removed a restriction around how many non-related people could live in a house.
Yeah.
Are there certain markets that are restrictive that you avoid?
There are certain markets that so far that we've come across that don't like pad split. So that is Fort Worth, Texas is one for sure. I have some notes on this. I can't, the other ones don't come to mind right off the bat. We haven't run any that have specifically said no co-living yet. And Fort Worth doesn't say no pad split. We've noticed that they've been kind of going after pad split.
Hmm.
So yeah, so there's
Pad
nothing on
split
the
or
books.
specifically or co-living?
Pad split specifically.
Okay.
Yeah, which I thought was interesting, but we haven't dived. I always get that one. It's a doved, dived. Deep dodge, duck dive, and dodge.
Right.
So yeah, we haven't dug too much into that. We did a property in Fort Worth recently, and pad split was an option when we started. And then our operations manager Joanna looked into it, and she's like, no, let's not do pad split here. They've been cracking down on it." And
Mm.
so yeah, so we have to kind of answer your question. That's the only one that I know off the bat that I can think of off the top of my head that for sure that like I wouldn't touch pad split. I wouldn't do a pad split in Fort Worth. Um, but we haven't come across any other ones that are like city-wise, don't do co-living here.
Right.
We have come across issues to be aware of when we're looking at co-living, um, kind of from a not letting the city or neighborhood crack down on you standpoint is one thing that we do is we always make sure that there's a lot of parking on the property or the street is wide enough to accommodate street parking. We've had a
Hmm.
couple that looked really, really good on paper, but then when we like went to the street view, the street was really like tight and narrow. And we had one that we actually were like, why the heck aren't there cars parked on this street? And digging into it, found that there was a city ordinance that said no parking cars on this street. And so just little like something little be to be aware of that that would really, really affect your co-living house if
Oh
you weren't
yeah.
able to park cars on the street, or if all of a sudden your tenants started parking cars on the street and like the neighbors did not like that. And so now you've got neighbors that are unhappy with you, and those are the ones that are going to ruin your co-living property. So like think just little things to be aware of when you're doing putting a property like this in place is like especially the neighbors, like let's make sure that the neighbors are happy and not calling the police or anything like that on us because that's how
Right.
houses get shut down.
So let's explain for the audience, just kind of in layman's term, what is co-living?
Essentially rent by the room. Pad Split likes to do rent by the room per week. We prefer at least on a monthly basis, which is another reason why we like not going with Pad Split. But essentially, like I said, somebody that can't afford a house or an apartment or something on their own, or doesn't want a house or an apartment on their own. They only need a room. It's a fully furnished house, so it has all the kitchen amenities that you would need to be able to come in and cook your food, store your food safely, right? And then you have your own room that you can go and it's your sanctuary. And when we're doing rent by the room, co-living, we'll pay for all the utilities are paid for, internet's paid for by us. We typically are doing, we're paying for all the yard maintenance, and we're doing a weekly cleaner comes in. And that is twofold for us. We're making sure that everybody's doing their job. It's a second set of eyes essentially on the house outside of our property manager, making sure that nobody's doing anything to destroy the house that needs to be brought up sooner than our property manager will find out. And like, it's just keeping the house clean, right? We want people to stay in the house. It's a service that we provide to the tenants in the house, and it's also protecting the house, our asset. So those are some things that we do
Yeah.
as far as rent by the room goes. Yeah, I like answer your question and then just like divert really bad. So it's just
No, that was a good
yeah.
explanation of it. So how are the numbers different on a co-living? Let's say it's a 3 bedroom, 2 bath ranch,
Mhm.
right? And it maybe it goes for $1,400 a month, traditionally like a long-term rental. How would that property perform differently if it was turned into co-living?
Yeah, so it depends on the numbers. It depends on the city of what you can actually charge by the room. But let's just say, you could charge per room $100 a week. Well, you take that $100 per week and you multiply it by 4.3 because that's the average number of weeks in a month throughout the given year. And that gives you your per room rate. Now, if we were to just leave this as a 3 bed, 2 bath house and we went and rented this out for, what would that be? Let's just call it $450 a month, right? The numbers are pretty similar. If I rented it out per room at $450 a month, or if I rented it out just as a long-term rental at $1,400 a month. Not a big difference. Not really worth the extra headache of having three tenants in there now. The
Hmm.
power of the co-living is when instead of it being a 3-2, I go make it a 5 or 6-2, or even like, a 6-3 if there's a way to add a bathroom or even a half bathroom in. Now I've created more opportunity for that $450 a month to grow. And so instead of having 450 times 3, I now have 450 times 6. Now the rental rate has doubled, if not more. So that's where
Right.
the power of co-living really comes in, is when I'm able to go take, a lot of the times we find 4 bed, 2 bath houses, and we go in and make it a 6-3. And now we've increased what we can bring in on a monthly basis.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. Like, why don't more people do this?
It can be difficult to manage yourself for sure, because now instead of just having one person that you're essentially responsible and going back and forth with, you have six. Um, and so for that reason, it's also more difficult to find property managers that are willing and able and capable to handle this, right? There's 6 people in the house, so it creates a little bit more risk that somebody's going to, there's going to be an altercation, things are going to get destroyed. Instead of having one person who's responsible for the house, you now have 6 people that are responsible for the house. So it is a little bit more risky from um, a ruling, what the heck, like a law or restrictions type thing. If you're in an HOA or a city that doesn't want these types of things, like you won't be able to do a co-living, right? HOAs don't like short-term and mid-term rentals a lot of the times. They're not going to like a co-living. I like to tell
Right.
people that unless they've already made a ruling, don't enter into it, right? If a HOA has said, "Hey, we don't want any less than 30-day leases on the books," it means that somebody's tried to do a short-term rental in there before and they've already talked about it, and they put the kibosh on there, right? If you're going into an HOA that has not talked about this, it's giving you yellow flags that maybe this isn't the best thing, because if you go in there, you don't want to be the first one to mess it up and now they're hammering down on
Mm.
you. Yeah.
So you just go in and you review their bylaws
Mhm.
just to make sure that they've already ruled on it because you don't want to leave it up to chance, basically.
Right. Yep.
That's a smart
And
move.
and most of the time we're fortunate that like the wholesalers have already done that work if there's an HOA. So that's a little plug for people that are wholesaling out there, is like, go do that due diligence. It doesn't take very long. Find the HOA and look through the rulings. And you can even just reach out and ask, hey, is there anything on the books? Because that really helps your investor buyers out, knowing, hey, there's no HOA restrictions. I'm still going to look. That's part of my due diligence. But if you tell me that there's a 30-day restriction, I know right off the bat that I can eliminate certain hold strategies. Excuse me, I had a
Right.
little hiccup there.
No, that's great advice. Just to pay attention to that. Do wholesalers go into a deal typically knowing what the exit strategy is already going to be, and so they're looking at the HOA in advance, or do they just think, okay, I want the biggest buyer pool out there, so I'm looking at it from a cash perspective,
Yeah.
seller financing. I'm looking at the HOA, so when I go to market this thing, it can fit a lot of different buy boxes, or are they very specific, do you think?
I see it both ways. I will see wholesalers. I tend to think that the more information a wholesaler can give to a buyer, the better. I can see it from another perspective, where if you just give the basic information, like you said, you're opening it up to more people. But ultimately, I'm going to ask these questions anyway. Right. So I have seen where wholesalers they will estimate what the long-term rental rate, they will estimate what midterm, short-term, what co-living might bring, and just be very detailed. Those are the ones we tend to really like to work with, because I know that they're thinking from my perspective at least. And so when I talk to wholesalers as well, they will say, hey, look, $20,000 entry fee, but they're not thinking about all the other costs that are associated with it as well. So if you can provide a estimate for rehabs, it doesn't have to be exact, but hey, we're estimating $40,000. It just gives me a quick, like, okay, I've got an idea of where this thing's going to be at. Um,
Hmm.
so I tend to feel like the more detailed that you can be, the better. It helps me, the buyer, but it also ultimately helps you, the wholesaler, because if I have questions that you haven't answered, now you're having to email me back and forth or text me back and forth. And if you multiply that by 10, 20, 50, your bigger buyers list, now you're just sitting there emailing back and forth about the details you could have just put into the email in the first place.
Right.
That's my soapbox.
Well, I think that there's probably some wholesalers that are out there that are thinking that they can pull one over on a, a buyer who's desperate,
Mm.
right? And they're willing to make a rash decision, because they need a property now. And so, wholesaler who locked up a property that at too high of a price, or, maybe it needs more work than everybody thinks, that it's going to slip one past the
Yeah.
buyer. But that's a risky proposition, because as soon as you create I guess, a history of just not playing the game properly, like, people aren't going to want to do business with you.
Yep. I've seen that a lot actually, where um, names have been made in a negative context and you don't see those people around for very long. It's just do good business and treat people the way you would want to be treated. I think it's so powerful.
It is.
Yeah.
And not that everyone's doing it intentionally, right? Like you said,
Right.
that maybe they just didn't think about all the angles. Like, what are some of the things you see most often? You mentioned the entry fee, like, and they're not thinking about rehab. What are some of the other things that maybe people are missing that they should pay attention to?
Yeah, like location is a pretty big one. But location only goes so far because there's a lot of different buyers out there. So where I look at the street view of a property, and I see cars parked on lawns and on blocks and stuff, it turns me away because it doesn't fit the whole strategies that we're doing. Somebody else might look at that and go, man, I can rent this thing out all day here to I have, the right tenant for it. That's their investment strategy. So, um, yeah, I don't really have a great answer for that, Benson, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it just goes back to, it's on a case by case situation,
Yeah.
right? Like, you can try to do your due diligence, and you can have a checklist of things, but there's like that last checkbox, which is like other, right? It's
Right.
like
Yeah, yeah.
everything else that's out there, right? That we haven't thought about. And that's where experience comes in.
Yeah.
I've been in this business for over 20 years, and every time I have a closing, something new pops up that I didn't anticipate,
That's
right?
crazy.
So you have to really be able to roll with the punches and get good at just solving problems, whatever they are.
Yeah. So true.
So you guys have been doing this for 7 years now, right? What are some of the more valuable lessons that you think you've picked up along the way?
It's so like your mind and your mindset is so important.
Hmm.
I talked about the ups and downs, and there's ups and downs no matter what you're entrepreneuring. Yeah, I made it. Maybe that's a question or a word that I just made up.
I think it's a
Like,
good one.
yeah, I mean, there's ups and downs in everything from being a husband to a son to a father, to an entrepreneur, and like having your mind right. And I mentioned the gap in the game. That's a big one for me that's really helped out. But just, you know, putting your mindset around this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to make it work because I see that it's working for other people. And, following along in the footsteps of those that are doing what you're doing and doing what you want to be doing, I think is a really big one. And then something that I've really found value in over the past couple years and which has helped us accelerate to where we are and where we're going is paying for other people's time. If you see somebody that is doing what you're doing and they're offering, a mentorship or a coaching program or something like that, if I can pay somebody, something that's going to take me 5 years to learn and I can learn it in 3 months, I should be doing that all day because I only have so much time on this earth. I don't have time to be spending 5 years learning something that I could be learning in 3 months if I just was willing to pay for it. Um,
Right.
we're actively going, as the year kind of winds here, we're going to actively be looking for what our next coaching kind of mentorship is. We have a couple on the docket. And so if there's any
Mm,
suggestions out there, I love
yeah.
yeah.
What are some of the ones you're looking at?
What the heck is the name? Dan. Oh, I'm forgetting the name. I'm
Mm,
forgetting the name of the author of Buy Back Your Time. I mean, of The Gap in the Game.
mm,
Yeah, he's got an entrepreneurial program that he talks about heavily in that one. I have a friend that's been in that. I've also a couple. There's a couple sales programs that I'm interested in. So always, trying to hone the sales skills as well as digital marketing. So it's just like we have a lot of different things going on. And how can I pay to learn things quicker and from people that are doing it at a high level? So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What the heck? Dan Sullivan.
Dan Sullivan.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah, yeah,
No, I think it's amazing, like that you guys are always constantly looking to improve, right? You're not resting on your laurels and be like, all right, we've got this all figured out, right? And maybe you do have a bunch of it figured out, but there's ways to get better,
yeah,
right? And you've got some big goals if you're going to go from, one a week to two a week, right? Like,
yeah.
how do you do that? Do you just hire more people? Do you add more efficiencies? There's all these, problems that you need to figure out how to solve to be able to scale up
Right.
and hit that next goal.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
that's
pretty
something that's
cool.
like thinking from, from a wholesaler, it's a very transactional thing. And how, okay, now I've got two deals. I'm doing two deals a month. Well, if I add a VA, for example, maybe that gets me to four deals a month. When we're thinking about going out and buying 2.5 properties a week, it changes the way I have to think about solving that problem. Like you said, is it hiring? Who do I hire? Do I hire from? We like to hire from the top down. So we hire a person that's literally right next to us working with us. At this point, going and hiring a VA, that's the last thing on my to-do list. I don't
Mhm.
need somebody doing the really low level tasks. We need to be thinking big picture here. And so, yeah, when you set these really big pie in the sky goals, it makes you look at things a little differently. Right. We had a $5,000 a month mindset while we were wholesaling. Just do one deal, right? When I go now, I want to make $100,000. It's a whole different set of problems now that I have to go figure out how to solve. So I love that you brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got your website here.
hmm
Um, what's on the website? If people go there, is there going to be a way for them to figure out ways of working with you, like being an equity partner, a JV partner? Like,
Yeah.
what is the what are you looking for as far as how can people help you?
I've originally started the website so I don't have to plug Instagram, YouTube, Facebook things. So if you go to the website, there's that. If you want to connect with me on any of the socials, that's the easiest way to do so. I have a couple different, it's a very basic website. It's almost a landing page, so to speak, but I have my own personal podcast that goes every Wednesday at noon. There's a way for you to get on a list to see who's upcoming in that, as well as just subscribe to the channel that way. I do a weekly Zoom that's on there. It's called Helping Hands Hour. It's designed just to help people get unstuck in their business, talk about specific deals. We role play seller agent calls, and they're really whatever you need kind of to move your needle in your business. And then, yes, like you mentioned, I have a calendar on there. So if you have money sitting on the sidelines right now and your goal was to buy real estate, you just haven't figured out how to do so, let's hop on a call. You can go to nathanielhovsepian.com and get on my calendar and we can talk and see how I can bring opportunities that fit what you're looking for.
Awesome.
Mm.
Well, this has been a great call, Nathan. I really appreciate you taking the time, and sorry we didn't get a chance to meet your wife or the kids.
Yeah, they're running
Um,
around.
yeah, but thanks for taking the time and being here, and thanks for sharing all your insights. And I know that you've probably inspired some people to take action. You got a couple recommendations for some books, and now you got this great website where people can go to learn more about you and potentially even work with you. So thanks again for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, brother. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. And everybody, thanks so much for listening to this edition of the REI Hacker Podcast. Please like and follow this episode, and please share it with your friends and family, and share it with anybody who you think needs just a little bit of inspiration or some education, some tips and tricks. We've got great guests coming on here in the future, like Nathan, that are doing real estate investing. They're entrepreneurs. They're out there solving big problems. And most importantly, they're taking action. So keep an eye out for more awesome guests like Nathan, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care.
That's a wrap on today's Real Estate Revelations. Thank you for tuning into the REI Hacker Podcast. Remember, every property has a story, and every deal is a lesson. Until next time, keep hacking the real estate world.